Hilchos Issurei Biah Perek Revi'i, the laws of forbidden relationships, chapter 4. We are starting today a topic that's going to take us till the end of chapter 11. This is going to go for a week, just about. And this is the topic of a nida, a woman who experiences uterine bleeding, either at a fixed time, a monthly cycle, or also irregular discharges of blood. That's called ziva. We're also going to explore a birthing woman, yoledet. Essentially all different cases where a woman can bleed vaginally and the effect it has on her status in terms of forbidden relationships. I think just before we begin the chapter, we should take a look at the basic laws of these different types of bleeding. So on the screen, you have the calendar of nida. Nida is classic menstrual bleeding. The halacha from the Torah, as the Rambam is going to describe it today, is that the moment a woman begins to menstruate as part of her monthly cycle, she becomes impure for 7 days. Whether the bleeding is only on one day, whether it stretches across multiple days, nida, impurity, is for 7 days. The moment the 7th day is over, you can see here on the night between the 7th and 8th day, that's why I put it on the line, you have mikvah. The woman goes to the mikvah at night, and she's pure. This is how it used to be on a monthly cycle for a woman. She would experience the cycle, count 7 days, go to the mikvah and be pure. That's one type of bleeding, regular bleeding. Then we have what's called, another calendar called ziva. Ziva means flow, and it's a reference to an irregular flow of blood, not part of the monthly cycle, or not part of the fixed cycle. If the blood only goes for 1 or 2 days, we're going to explore this in later chapters, 1 or 2 days, no big deal. All you have to do is keep 1 day of purity and go to mikvah and you're good. But once you experience irregular blood flow for 3 days in a row, that's why these 3 boxes are highlighted, were she to experience 3 regular days of blood flow, she immediately becomes impure and can only become pure if she has 7 spotless days. It's called 7 clean days in the Torah. So I made them light red, not because they're bleeding days, but because they're actually days of becoming pure. She needs to check herself, at least at the beginning and the end of these 7 days, but ideally every day. And she needs to find that she is clean every one of the 7 days. If she is, then she goes to the mikvah on the following day, and she's pure. This is nida and ziva. Here's another possibility, before we get to the laws nowadays. This is the calendar of a birthing woman, a yoledet. When a woman gives birth, on the right we have the calendar of a woman who gives birth to a male, and on the left we have the woman who gives birth to a female. Woman who gives birth to a male has a special law. The Torah says, Shiv'at Yamim. She's only impure for 7 days. So day 1 will be the day she gives birth. Of course, typically birth is accompanied by bleeding. The Torah says she must count 7 days, and no matter what's happening after the 7 days. After 7 days, she goes to mikvah, and then she gets a 33-day pass. After giving birth to a male and experiencing 7 days of impurity, she gets 33 days of green lights, which means no matter whether she's bleeding or not, she can continue to have relations with her husband. This is called dam tohar. The Torah gives a special dispensation that any time during these 33 days, she's totally permitted to her husband. With a female, it's doubled. You get 14 days of impurity instead of 7, but after the 14 days you go to mikvah and you have 66 days of pass. 66 days of pass, free for all, have relations even if the woman is bleeding. These are all the Torah laws, 3 different categories. Nida for 7 days and then mikvah. Ziva, if she experiences 3 days of bleeding, goes to the mikvah, must count 7 clean days, then goes to the mikvah. And birthing woman gets 7-day count and 33-day pass, or 14-day count and a 66-day pass.
You said birthing what?
Birthing woman, yoledet. Now, this is all going to be the topic of the next few chapters, but the Rambam is going to tell us in chapter 11 that nothing of this applies nowadays. Nowadays, we have what's called the classic nida cycle, and women today who keep laws of ritual purity will go through this cycle. And that is, the sages considered that any time a woman bleeds, no matter if it's for 1 day or 3 days, no matter if it's the regular cycle or not regular cycle, The moment a woman experiences bleeding, she considers herself to adopt the stringencies of both a nida and a zava, which means after the bleeding stops, she's going to count 7 clean days, even if it's her regular cycle, but she's only going to begin that count of 7 clean days after the bleeding stops, which is why today, classically, a woman, once she begins her cycle, has at least 12 days of abstinence. She will count 5 days from the day the bleeding begins, because typically after 5 days, the bleeding stops. At this point, she does what's called a hefsek tahara. She does an internal check to make sure that the bleeding has stopped. Once she confirms the bleeding has stopped, she then begins to count 7 spotless days as though she were a zava, as though she were a woman who experienced irregular bleeding, even though typically it's at the regular time of the cycle. She still counts 7 clean days and only then goes to the mikveh at the end of the 7 days. That's nowadays, that's going to come in chapter 11. But it's important to know these different distinctions as we go into the chapter. Today the Rambam is going to be focused more on the nida. As we get to chapter 6, we're going to compare and contrast the nida and the zava and the birthing woman, the yoledet, etc. So let's begin. Says the Rambam, halacha aleph, hanida, a woman who is in a nida state. And we're going to define what that means. Typically it means the regular cycle of sighting blood. Harehi kishar kol ha'arayos. The moment the woman enters into her nida state, she is considered like any other forbidden relationship by the Torah. Hamayreba, one who merely inserts the beginning of his organ inside her, bein kedarka, bein shaloi kedarka, whether the natural or the unnatural way. Chay of kares is liable to the penalty of excision. Ba'afilu haisaketana ba'shalosh shanim v'yein echad, even if she was a minor, just the age of 3 years old, kishar arayos, the same laws that dictate other forbidden relationships dictate this one. Of course, less than 3. Relationship is of no significance, so it doesn't matter. But once she's 3 years old, she can become a nida. As a matter of fact, says the Rambam, shahabas mistama benida va'afilu b'yem leidasa. A woman can become impure as a nida state even the day she's born. It's highly abnormal, but if a woman were to experience, or a baby girl were to experience vaginal bleeding in the day she's born, she's considered to be a nida. Ubasasara yamim mitama beziva. And the earliest she can become impure in the ziva way would be at 10 days old. We're going to see this later in chapter 6, that a woman can only become impure with irregular flow if she first counts 7 days which belong to her regular flow. So assuming a baby girl could see blood the day she's born, the first 7 days of her life would be reserved for nida, and only if she sees then irregular blood, so to speak, on day 8, 9, and 10 of her life, only after 3 days do you become a zava, as I explained before. So the minimum she can become a zava is at 10 days old. V'davar zemi pi ashmu alamdu. And this matter was learned from oral tradition. She'ein hefresh bein gelo liktana. There's no difference between an adult girl and a minor girl. L'tumas nidos v'zivos, with regards to the impurity of being a nida state or a zava state. Both of these can happen as a minor. In terms of relations, you're only going to be held culpable after the girl is 3 years old, but it's still possible to have that situation arise at that young age. Says the Rambam, halacha beis ve'echad haba al hanida kol shivas hayamim. This law of nida, although the Torah phrases it and uses the word nida, which is typically a word used to describe a monthly fixed cycle, the prohibition, though, is whether one has relations with the nida all 7 days. As I mentioned to you before, the nida gets an automatic impurity for a week. And even if she only experiences the sighting on 1 day. The echad haba al yeleda zachar kol shiva or yeledas nekeva kol arba asar. Or whether one has relations with a woman who gave birth to a male for the 7 days of impurity, or to a female for the 14 days. As we see here on the calendar, I showed you the first 7 days automatically after birth of a male, and 14 days after a female are automatically impure. For all practical purposes, in terms of relationships, at this point, she is classified as a nida, and you would transgress relations with her as you would with a regular nida. Oi al hazava, kol yemei zoiva usfirasa, or having relations with a zava, a woman who experiences irregular flow. All the days of her actual bleeding, let's say here it's 3 days of bleeding, and the days of her counting, the 7 clean days, which she must count before she becomes impure. Bein shifcha, bein meshucheres, whether she is a maidservant or a freed slave, or a free woman, a regular full-fledged Jew, makes no difference. Hakoil bikares. All of these women go under the category of nida with regards to relationships, to make a person that has relations with her liable for a karet, for excision. And now that Rambam demonstrates it in the verses. Shenemar, because it says, first we go to the primary verse. This is in the book of Vayikra. It says, V'isha kisiya zava, dam yiyah zayva bifsara. When a woman experiences a blood flow from her flesh, shiv'at yamim tiyeh benidata. That's the primary verse for nida. Immediately, she goes into a state of nida for 7 days. Then you go to the next verse, and it says, "V'isha ki yazuv zayvdama yamim rabim beloy es nidasa." If a woman were to experience a blood flow for a number of days, not at the time of her nida, which means not at the typical time of blood flow, it's an irregular blood flow. Excuse me, what does it say then? Kol yemei zoiv tum'asa kimei nidasa tiyeh. All the days of the flow of her impurity shall be treated like the days of her nida. So the Rambam quotes over here, which means for the purposes of relationships, she's considered to be a nida. Then we examine the verses of a birthing woman. Look what it says here, earlier in the book of Vayikra. With a woman who gives birth to a male child, it says, like the days of her separation from her regular flow. She should be impure. Again, using the word nida, it's like a nida. And when a woman gives birth to a female, a couple of verses later, it says, V'tama shivu'ayim kinidasa, she is impure for 2 weeks, like her nida. So in all of these verses, Torah compares the women to the nida. So if by the nida we find that you're liable to excision and having relations with her, any other of these women who are also bleeding for other reasons also are considered a nida with regards to relationships. Now that Rambam says something very, very important. We gave you just now some limitations of days. A nida is impure for 7 days, a zava is impure for 7 clean days, whatever it is. Says the Rambam, when do we say that the state of impurity depends on the days that pass? It's only if she immersed in the waters of a mikveh after those days. So you say a woman who experiences a regular blood flow is impure for 7 days does not mean that after 7 days it's free for all. Only if she immersed in a mikveh right here on this night. Aval nida v'zava v'yeledas shaloi tavlu b'mei mikveh. Were a woman to experience regular blood flow and become a nida, irregular blood flow and become a zava, or give birth and become a yoledet, if they do not go to mikveh after their prescribed time, haba al achas mehen afilu achar kama shanim chayav karis. If someone has relations with them, even after many years, you're still liable to excision. She remains in the status of impurity. Shabiyamim utvila tala hakasu, because Torah depends the matter on both days passing and immersion. Shanemar, as it says, and here's the verse, Virachatzu b'mayim. They must wash themselves in water. This, in context, is talking about a regular man who has relations with a woman. In temple times, just having relations was enough of a reason to require both of you to go to mikveh. But since the word is Virachatzu b'mayim, Zeb binyan av. This is one of the principles of exegesis in the Torah. Binyan av means literally a building of a father, but it's like this becomes like the primary rule, which teaches everywhere in Torah, l'chol tameh, that any person who is impure, shu betum asay ad sheyitbel, he remains in the status of impurity till he goes to mikveh. And this has incredible ramifications nowadays. People are unaware of it. When we talk about having relations out of wedlock today, people have premarital relations. The issue is not just that you're doing it out of marriage. The issue is that typically a woman who is not married, has menstruated, has had her period, and never gone to the mikveh. So in a sense, every time you have relations, you're violating this high-level excision prohibition. So it's very important to spread the word about it and spread awareness. Years later, if she never went to the mikveh, she remains impure. The Rebbe would actually encourage that even women after menopause, if they were known not to have gone to mikveh earlier in their life, they should at least go to mikveh now, just to take off that state of impurity. If you had a nida period 25 years ago, you never went to the mikveh, doesn't make a difference. You're still impure. So it's a very, very big thing, especially if you're within the context of a marriage. Certainly you should be careful about this, that not to let a month go by without going to the mikveh and keeping family purity. Halacha dalet, ha'akum, idol-worshipping Gentiles, or Gentiles in general. Ein chayavin aleihem mishum nida v'loi mishum zava v'loi mishum yeledas. Even though, of course, it's forbidden to have relationships with them, but you're not held liable on account of them being a nida or a zava or a birthing woman. In other words, even if they experience bleeding, relations with them, you won't get an X, for those things as well. The chachamim gazru al kol ha'akum hazacharim v'hanekevos. The sages imposed a decree on all Gentiles, male and female, sheyiyu kizavim tamid. They should be considered like a zav, like a man or a woman who experiences irregular discharge, bein ro, bein leiro, whether in fact they cite it or not, l'inyan tuma v'tara, with regards to purity and impurity. Not so much in regards to relationships, but in the 10th book, we're going to learn that people that experience these discharges also become ritually impure in terms of touching other things, etc. So with regards to their status of ritual impurity, the sages consider them to be a zav and a zava. But in terms of relations, you don't get held liable for these things. It says that Rambam talking about the woman who gives birth, as I mentioned in the introduction, kol dam shatire hayeledes, any blood seen by a birthing woman, b'soich lamed gimel shel zachar, v'samach vav shel nekeva, during the free-for-all time, the 33 days for a male, and the 66 days for a female, hu hanikra dam toyhar, is called blood of purity. Ve'ein meinea es ha'isha mibayla, it does not withhold the woman from her husband. Ela toiveles achar shiva lezachar v'achar arba shel nekeva, rather she simply goes to mikvah. After 7 days have passed since the birth of a male, or 14 days have passed since the birth of a female, or mishameshas mitasa, and she may have relations, afal pisha hadam sheisis v'yered, even though the blood is dripping and flowing out. The blood during these days is totally pure. As I mentioned today, we don't have this law, but this is the biblical law. Halacha vav, kol chayave tvila, any woman who needs to go to the mikvah, as a matter of fact, anybody who needs to go to the mikvah biblically, tvilasan bayayim. The mitzvah is to go to the mikvah by day, chutz minida v'yeledes, except for a woman who experiences a menstrual flow and a birthing woman. Shaharehu oimer benida, because it says by the nida, and we return to the verse, shivas yamim tia benidasa. For 7 full days, she must be in her nida state, which means hashiva kulan benidasa. All 7 days, she remains in the status of nida. And of course, you go to mikvah at the earliest possibility, b'toiveles belel shmini. So she goes to the mikvah at the night of the 8th day. Same thing with the birthing woman. They will go to the mikvah on the night of the 8th day over here. After 7 days, this night following, go to the mikvah. Or 14 days, this night following, go to the mikvah. Because a birthing woman is considered to have the same status as a nida, as we explained. If a woman was delayed many days and never went to the mikvah, when she does go to the mikvah, she should still do it at night, which seemingly isn't so logical, right? Because if you're delayed many days, then your 7 days have fully passed already. So who cares when you go to the mikvah? It says the Rambam, we don't want to differentiate, and we don't want people to misconstrue. If she will go to the mikvah by day, yitu, people will make a mistake. And that may cause another woman to go to the mikvah on day number 7 while she's still impure. Because she'll see her friend, oh, she went to the mikvah by day, so maybe I can also. So therefore, a nida, whenever she goes to the mikvah, always by night. Halacha ches. What if the delay wasn't because of her laziness or negligence? She was sick. Or the place of immersion, the mikvah, the local mikvah was very far. The woman cannot go back and forth by night, either because there's robbers on the road, or because it's too cold, or they lock the city gates at night. So if you leave, you can't come back in. So then, she can go to the mikvah on day number 8, or on any other days afterwards by day, because here the fault doesn't lie with her, the fault lies with the circumstances, and then we can go to the mikvah by day. Now the question obviously is, what's the difference? The bottom line is you may cause a mistake to another woman, think that you can go by day. So why do we only say that if she's delayed on her own, she should go by night? But any other circumstance, she can go by day. The Rebbe once gave an interesting answer. He said that it depends how you look at mikvah. Is mikvah an active process? A woman goes in intentionally to the water and becomes pure? Or it's an automatic process in which the water just comes over her and she becomes pure automatically? So by default, we look at it as an automatic process. In an automatic process, once it's time for you to go to the mikvah, since had she fallen into a mikvah, she would become pure anyway because it's not an active process. So it doesn't matter whether she goes by day or by night. But if she delays herself purposely, then she has become an active part of the process. So she's become an active part of the process. We have to treat her going to the mikvah as an active process. And if she were to actively go by day, that would cause others to make a mistake. So we force her to go by night. It's an interesting kind of merge of philosophical halacha, if you will. It's based on a statement from the Ragachover Gaon, who was very, very into that, very abstract way of thinking in halacha. At any rate, says the Rambam halacha tes. Kol hanashim sheyesh lahen vesas. Any woman who has a fixed time for sighting. The word vesas means set time. In other words, every 30 days, typically, maybe it's every 25 days, whatever it is, she knows when to expect her monthly cycle. Bechezkas tara lebalein. Such a woman is always presumed to be pure to her husband, ad shetomer leitmeyani, until she says, I'm impure. Or until she is presumed to be a nida amongst her neighbors because she would wear certain clothes which would tell everybody that she's a nida, stay away from her. And therefore, if a husband went on a trip abroad, and when he left her, she was in a state of purity, when he comes back, no need to even ask her. Even if he finds her sleeping. You're allowed to engage in relations with her, so long as it isn't the time period of her menstruation, as we'll soon see what that means. It basically means the 12-hour time frame where she's expected to menstruate. As long as it's not that, he can have relations with her without a need to worry perhaps she's a nida. And this leniency goes further, because if you think about it, when he went on a trip, she may have seen during her regular cycle, which would then cause her to have to go to the mikveh. Maybe she didn't go to the mikveh, and we saw before that if a woman doesn't go to the mikveh, she remains in her status of impurity. But that's the whole thing here. Since he left her pure with a fixed cycle, the assumption can be made that even if she had the cycle, she also went to the mikveh and took care of herself. And therefore, there's no need to suspect. However, if he left her on the trip in a state of impurity, then the last thing he knows is that she's impure, she is forbidden to him till she expressly says, I am pure, while you were away, I went to the mikveh, took care of myself. By the way, even today, when a woman goes to the mikveh on her monthly cycle, she is supposed to tell her husband when she comes out, I'm pure, to expressly let him know that she is pure. Because the last thing he knew was that she was impure. Halacha yud, ha'isha she'amra lebayla tmeyani. A woman tells her husband, I'm impure. V'chazra v'amra tahayrani. And then she says, actually I'm pure. I told you in the beginning it was a joke. Eina ne'amenes, she's not believed. She said she's impure, she's impure. But if she gave an excuse, in other words, she can explain away, justify why she said what she said, ne'amenes, then she's believed. Ketzad, what does that look like? A justification. Tava baila. Let's say her husband had demanded her to have relations with her. But his sister or his mother was with them in the courtyard. So she responds, I'm actually impure, I'm not fit for relations. Later, when they're in privacy, she says, really I'm pure. The only reason I said I'm impure, I was worried about your sister or your mother, maybe they'll see us. So she's believed. Was anything like that? Any similar excuse? The commentaries say, I was tired, I didn't have the strength for it. Or I thought I was impure, then I checked and I was really pure. These are good justifications to explain away her words, and we consider her to be pure. Halacha Yud Aleph, if a man was engaged in relations with his wife who was pure, and during the act she tells him, I became impure, I'm beginning to bleed. You may not withdraw right away while erect. Because there's pleasure in the withdrawal as there is in the entry. If he did withdraw while he was erect, he's liable to excision as though he had relations with a nida. Same would be for any other forbidden relationship. What should a man do if this situation arises? He should stick his toenails into the ground, and wait and not move until the organ goes limp. And only afterwards slip out of her. This way, you don't transgress in the act of withdrawal itself. Halacha Yud Beis, as a distancing measure from engaging in relations with a nida, said the sages, it's forbidden for a person to have relations with his wife close to her fixed time. And we'll soon define what that means. Because perhaps she will see blood during relations, become impure, which will cause big problems. Shenemar, as it says, V'hizartem es b'nei Yisrael mitumasam. This is a verse, also in the book of Vayikra. It says, you should warn the Jewish people about their impurity, which the sages interpret to mean you should create extra distances. And if a woman is expected to menstruate in this time period, don't have relations during the entire time period. The kama, What's called close to the relationship, close to the time. Im haya darka liras bayayim. If the woman typically sees the blood by day, asur l'shamish mitchilas hayayim. It's forbidden to engage in relations from the beginning of the day, from sunrise. V'im haya darka liras balayla. If she typically saw the blood during the night, asur l'shamish mitchilas halayla. It's forbidden to have relations starting at the beginning of the night at sunset. Avar vesta v'lo yirasa. If the time expected for menstruation passed and she did not sight the blood, muteres l'shamesh, she's only permitted to have relations again achar shetaver einas haveses, once the time frame around the expected time passes, which means till the end of the day or the night. Ketzah, what does that look like? Haya darka liris b'sheish shoyes bayayim. If the normal time for her to sight was at 6 hours into the day, asura l'shamesh mitchilas hayayim. She's forbidden to have relations from the beginning of the day, from sunrise. Avru sheish shoyes bayayim b'leid asa. But even if 6 hours passed in the day and she hasn't seen any blood, asura l'shamesh ad la'erev. She's forbidden to have relations till the evening. Same thing if she was accustomed to see 6 hours into the night, and those 6 hours passed without sighting, she still cannot have relations till sunrise. Says the Rambam, there's another measure of distance that Jewish people took upon themselves to get away from this nida issue. It's always the custom of Jewish men and women to check themselves after engaging in relations. Perhaps the woman had bled during the relations. Ketzah, what does that look like? The man cleans himself with a cloth fitting for him. And the woman cleans herself with a cloth fit for her. And they check it to see. Perhaps they saw blood during relations. A man is allowed to allow his wife to check his cloth. In other words, we'll believe her word on both of them. Since she's believed about her cloth, she's believed about his cloth as well. However, today it's just important to note that Shulchan Aruch, although he mentions the Rambam, but the halacha is that if a woman has a fixed time for sighting blood, we don't require her to check after every single relations. We expect that the blood will come at the fixed time. If there's no fixed, if she has an irregular type of pattern of bleeding, then the way we say it is that after the first 3 times after they get married, they check each other, they check the cloths, and after that, once there hasn't been seen for 3 times, we just go and it's okay to engage in relations. But as the Rambam rules it, this is the way of Jewish people to check every single time. Halacha tezvav begadim elo shemekanchin mahen. These cloths which are used to clean, tzrichin sheyiyu shel pishtan shchakim ulevanim. They have 3 conditions. They have to be made out of linen, they have to be worn, and they have to be white. They're called in this context edim, witnesses. That's a word for the cloth. The cloth used by the husband is called his cloth. The cloth used by her to clean is called her cloth. It says that Rambam hatznuos, modest women, in addition to checking themselves after relations, would not engage in relations till they check themselves beforehand, before the relations. The isha she'ein la veses, a woman who has no fixed time for sighting, is actually not even modesty. Asura l'shamesh ad shetivdek. It's actually prohibited for her to have relations till she checks herself, because perhaps she has just bled. She has an irregular pattern. Lefichach hi mishameshes b'shnei edim. Therefore, a woman with an irregular cycle must have relations only with 2 cloths. Echad lifnei atashmish ve'echad la'achar atashmish. One before, one after relations. But a woman who has a fixed set time for sighting does not require a cloth before relations, only it's an act of modesty if she wants. But after relations, everyone requires 2 cloths, one for him, one for her. Even a pregnant woman, a nursing woman, or an old woman, there is no chance of blood naturally, physiologically. Doesn't matter. So too should a minor only have relations with 2 cloths, one for him, one for her. But a virgin woman who is going to be bleeding for other reasons, and a woman who is in the state of the the free-for-all days, where her blood is pure, when such women have relations, they don't require cloths, because anyways the blood is dripping. When she's a virgin, there's hymenal bleeding, and when she's in the state of pure blood, we don't care about the blood. So therefore they don't require the cloth. Halacha Yud Zayin HaMeshamish Mitase Pa'amim Rabbis, were one to engage in relations multiple times during the night. Einon Tzrichin Livdek Shnei Ha'edim Shalahen Al Kol Biah U'Biah. There's no requirement to check the two cloths after every act of relations. Ela Mekaneach Hu Ba'ed Shalai V'Hi Ba'ed Shalah Achar Kol Biah U'Biah Shal Kol Alayla. They rather simply, they clean themselves with their cloths after every relations all night. Ulamachar Yivdeku Ha'edim, and the next day check the cloths for all the times. Nimtza Hadam Al Eid Shalai Al Eid Shalai Arezu Tmeya. If, of course, they discover blood on his cloth or her cloth, she'll be impure. Shimsha mitasa v'kincha atzma v'avada eid. If a woman engaged in relations, cleaned herself and lost the cloth, harezulei tashamish pam shniya ad shetivdek be'eid acher tchila. She cannot have relations again till she uses another cloth to check herself. Shema dam haya ala eid sha'avad. Perhaps there was blood on the cloth that was lost. Now, if you're worried about that, who cares if she cleans herself again? Maybe the one that was lost had blood. But the commentaries say once she checks herself again, we can presume that if this one was clean, the last one was also clean. If she places the cloth under a pillow or a blanket, and afterwards you discover blood. So she had relations, checked herself, and put it away under a pillow. And now there's blood. Where did the blood come from? Says the Rambam, if the stain is extended, that's impure. It probably came from an act of wiping, of cleaning. But if the stain was round, she's pure. This is nothing more than the blood of a louse, which was killed under the pillow. In other words, we say she put it under the pillow, and when she leaned down, she killed a louse. That's why there's a round stain. It wouldn't typically come from bleeding, from bodily bleeding. From wiping, yeah. Yutes, exactly. There's a streak. There you go. Halacha Yutes, kincha atzma be'eda badukla, v'tachatu bi'erecha, if she cleaned herself with her cloth, and the cloth was checked by her. In other words, she has no previous awareness of any stain on this cloth. And then she stuck it into her thigh. Ulamachar nimtza alav dam, and the next day there's blood. Harezu tmeya, she is impure. Ve'ein oimrim shema keshetacha isa bi'erecha nerga ma'acheles. We don't say maybe when she put it into her thigh, she killed a louse by mistake that was on her. No, that's less reasonable. And therefore she has to assume that she's impure. Kincha atzma be'eid she'enei badukla. By the way, there's an argument in the commentaries of here, you have to check the shape of the streak. Is it long or is it round? Some say the same laws still apply. If it's round, she has more room to be lenient. Some say no. But either way, there's less leniency to be had as far as a louse is concerned. Kincha atzma be'eid she'enei badukla. What if she had cleaned herself with a cloth that had not been checked? V'lo yada im haya alav dam kedem shetekaneach bay oiloi haya. And she doesn't know, was there blood before or not? Now, of course, if she knows that there was blood before, that's nothing to talk about. She doesn't know what the status was. And now, nimtza alav dam, you find blood on the cloth. Im haya hadam ki gris ve'oid. If the blood was the size of a gris, a type of bean, today it's commonly accepted about the size of a dime, harezu nida, she is considered to be impure. Haya pachas mikain tahira, if it was a smaller stain than that, she is pure. She'enei ela min ha'ma'acheles, it probably only comes from a louse. Halacha chaf misharas adam b'shas tashmish. If a woman did experience blood during relations, harezu muteres l'shamish k'shetitar pam shniya. Of course, she must become pure. Once she becomes pure, she can have relations again a second time. Ras adam b'pam shniya. If she saw blood a second time, mishameshes pam shlishis, she can have a third time relations. Ras adam b'shlishis, but if in the third consecutive time she saw blood again, harezu asura l'shamish in baal zeh la'ilam, she can never again have relations with this husband. There's a chazakah, there's a presumption of impurity. She will always see blood during relations, which is of course prohibited by the Torah. When do we say this? There's nothing else to hang on. There's no other justification for it. But if she had relations, transgressing the prohibition of the sages, during the time frame close to her menstrual period, during the 6 hours before or after, she can hang it on that. Say, you know what, that's probably why I saw blood, because it was the time that I was expected to menstruate. If she had a wound in the vaginal canal, she can hang it on that. Of course, if the shade of the wound blood was different than the shade of the blood she would see during relations, then you can't blame one on the other. She cannot blame it on the wound, but otherwise, yes. A woman can say, she's believed to say, I have a wound inside my canal. From where the blood is coming, it's not coming from the uterus, and she'll be permitted to her husband. Even if there's actual blood flowing out of the canal during relations. Pam rishayno shnio shlishis. A woman experienced blood during relations. Once, twice, and 3 times. Ve'ein sham davar listless bay with no justification for it. Harezut tizgare, she must get divorced from this husband. However, umuteres lihinasi lasheni. She can marry a second husband. Nisas lasheni v'ras adam kach b'shas tashmi shalish pamim. If she married a second man and saw blood the same way during relations 3 times, harezut tizgare, she must get divorced. However, v'tinas lashlishi, she can still get married to a third man. Nisas lashlishi. But if in the 3rd marriage she also saw blood 3 times during relations in a row, she must get divorced, and now she has a presumption that's going to happen to all men. And therefore, she cannot get married until she becomes healed from this sickness. How will she check? How do you ascertain whether or not you've been healed from this wound, from this illness? This is more of a primitive type of check that Rambam will illustrate it how they used to do it. She brings a lead tube, whose mouth is folded over into it, so it's not smooth, doesn't scratch. She inserts the tube till wherever she can reach. And then she puts like a shaft into the tube with a cloth at its edge. And she pushes it in till the cloth reaches the entrance to the womb. And then takes out the cloth. If there's blood at the edge of the swab, then of course the blood coming during relations is coming straight from the uterus, because she blocked off the walls of the vaginal canal and she's still seeing blood. But if nothing appears on the swab, so then of course any blood that she's doing relations is only coming from pressure put on the sides of her body. And she's really pure. And she can marry other people. She can't stay married to this guy because she's already become forbidden to him, but she can marry somebody else. As we've explained in the laws of marriage, that's allowed to have a remarriage, because she has ascertained that it's not coming from the uterus, rather from a wound.